In the Middle Ages, kings ruled kingdoms, knights fought dragons, and peasants fought something far more terrifying: the toilet. There were no soft rolls, no perfumed paper, not even a wooden stick of dignity. Just nature, desperation, and whatever happened to be nearby. Imagine this: a freezing winter morning in a castle with stone walls colder than death. You wake up, pull up your robes, and step into a narrow chamber built over a pit that smells like the end of the world. You finish your royal business, and now comes the question no history book ever dared to ask: what did they use next? Because in the Middle Ages, cleanliness wasn't a luxury, it was a legend. And the truth about how people wiped their medieval behinds might just change the way you look at history and your bathroom. To understand how people wiped in the Middle Ages, you first have to understand how they lived and what they believed about dirt, purity, and the human body. In medieval Europe, hygiene wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of the soul. Cleanliness was seen less as a physical habit and more as a moral condition. Most people didn't bathe regularly. In fact, some thought bathing too often could make you sick. Doctors of the time believed that warm water opened the pores and let disease, or worse, demons, slip in. The church encouraged modesty and restraint, teaching that excessive attention to the body could lead to sin. Smelling too good was suspicious. Smelling bad was simply human. And so medieval hygiene became a delicate balance between survival and salvation. The poor worked and sweated, the nobles perfumed and powdered, and everyone agreed that washing was optional, but prayer was not. Public bathhouses did exist, but many were later condemned as places of immorality. The association between dirt and virtue grew stronger until the idea of scrubbing one's body seemed almost sinful. And if washing your hands was already a rare luxury, imagine what came after using the toilet. Because in a world without plumbing, without running water, and without privacy, the medieval bathroom was less a room and more a revelation about what people truly feared and valued. Welcome to Medieval Crazy History, where the strangest truths of the Middle Ages come back to life. When you picture a medieval castle, you probably imagine grand halls, shining armor, feasts of roasted boar and golden goblets of wine. But what you rarely imagine is where all that food went afterward, because behind every throne, there was another kind of throne. Medieval toilets were called garderobes, a word that sounds elegant until you realize it literally means a place to guard your robes. In most castles, they were small stone chambers built into the outer walls, with a wooden seat and a hole leading straight down to whatever was unfortunate enough to be beneath it. Sometimes it was a moat, sometimes a pit, sometimes the courtyard, and if the wind was blowing in the wrong direction, the experience could be described as both religious and traumatic. In the cold months, the stone seats were icy enough to make even a knight question his bravery. There were no doors, no privacy, and certainly no scented candles, just the echoes of your own regret. But for all its horrors, the garderobe was a luxury, because the vast majority of people in medieval Europe didn't have a toilet at all. Peasants used the fields, the forest, or a bucket, whichever was closer or less embarrassing at the moment. Villages often had open ditches or communal pits that served as public facilities, though the term public might be too generous. Archaeologists have found layers of compacted waste in old settlements, sometimes mixed with broken pottery and animal bones, a literal time capsule of everything people ate and everything they didn't want to talk about. In cities, things got even worse. As populations grew, so did the smell. Waste was often dumped directly into the street or the nearest river. The Thames in London, for example, was a running joke and a running sewer. People threw their chamber pots out the window, sometimes shouting "Gardez-l'eau" before releasing a deadly surprise onto the unsuspecting pedestrians below. Historians suspect that many medieval hats were invented for this very reason. Inside castles, however, some lords and ladies tried to bring a touch of dignity to the process. They lined their garderobes with fabric, burned incense, or hung herbs to disguise the smell. Some even designed multiple toilets in their towers, a medieval luxury suite of stench. The most extravagant castles had chutes that led waste directly into the moat, making the water outside both a defense system and a health hazard. There were even superstitions about these private chambers. People believed that demons could enter the body through the same place where sin left it. So many nobles prayed before using the toilet, asking for divine protection against unseen spirits, and possibly against the smell. Still, for all its unpleasantness, the garderobe symbolized progress. It was a step toward privacy, towards civilization, towards something vaguely resembling plumbing. But no matter how fancy your stone toilet might be, one problem remained. What do you use when you're done? Now that you've survived the medieval toilet itself, it's time for the real question. What came next? Because while the garderobe was a marvel of medieval engineering, it lacked something modern civilization considers essential: toilet paper. And if you're imagining soft rolls of parchment or silk for the nobles, think again. In the Middle Ages, wiping was less a matter of comfort and more an act of improvisation. People used whatever was available, whatever was cheap, and whatever wouldn't give them a rash. Most of the time, for the poor, the options were endless and equally terrible. In rural areas, they often used grass, leaves, hay, moss, or even handfuls of straw. These materials were easy to find and, when fresh, somewhat tolerable. But in winter, when the ground froze, improvisation took a darker turn. Historical records mention people using pieces of cloth, smooth stones, or even handfuls of snow. Yes, snow, history's coldest form of regret. Archaeologists have found evidence of such tools in old latrines. Layers of sediment revealed fragments of wool, bits of moss, and in some cases, pieces of broken pottery, smooth on one side, sharp on the other. Some scholars believe these shards were used as makeshift scrapers. Others think they were accidental. Either way, both theories hurt. For the wealthy, things weren't much better, just fancier. Nobles used scraps of linen or wool, sometimes perfumed with rosewater. In France, it was said that kings wiped with soft cloths of silk, though given how silk was imported from Asia and worth its weight in gold, this claim is likely wishful thinking or propaganda. More realistically, noble households reused small towels that were later washed by servants, a job no amount of gold could justify. In monasteries, things were even stranger. Monks followed strict rules about cleanliness and modesty, yet they faced the same biological problem as everyone else. Historical accounts from certain abbeys mention the use of communal cloths. Yes, a shared wiping rag, passed from one brother to another, washed occasionally, and blessed regularly. The spirit was willing, but the hygiene was weak. Elsewhere, sailors on long voyages used old ropes or bits of canvas dangling over the ship's edge, a medieval wipe and rinse system courtesy of the ocean. In coastal areas, seashells were sometimes used, and while that sounds poetic, it's a terrible idea. One wrong move and you'd have more than a confession to make. Across the Islamic world, hygiene was far more advanced. Medieval Muslim societies practiced istinja, washing with water after relieving oneself, a custom rooted in both religion and health. Europeans who traveled east found this shocking at first, but later admitted it worked far better than straw and snow. Sadly, it took Europe several more centuries to figure that out. Even within Christian Europe, people knew on some level that cleanliness mattered. Physicians recommended washing the lower parts with vinegar or wine to prevent disease, though few could afford such luxury. Others used herbs and ashes as makeshift disinfectants. Still, most medieval people saw dirt not as a danger, but as destiny. So, when nature called, you answered, with whatever nature provided. Leaves, cloth, hay, moss, shells, snow, or, if you were truly desperate, your hand. After all, there's a reason forks became popular later. But here's the surprising part. Despite all this filth, people survived. Their immune systems were probably stronger than their dignity, and humor, even then, was a kind of defense. Because when every trip to the toilet could turn into a medieval horror story, all you could really do was laugh and hope the wind was blowing in your favor. If you think medieval life was unfair when it came to money, power, and food, wait until you hear about toilets. Because in the Middle Ages, even your bathroom habits depended on your social class. The nobles relieved themselves in stone chambers above moats, while peasants had something far more primitive: nature. For the elite, the garderobe was more than just a place of necessity. It was a symbol of refinement, the medieval version of indoor plumbing, minus the plumbing. These private rooms were often attached to castle bedrooms, lined with cold stone and built above pits or rivers that carried everything away. At least, that was the theory. In reality, the waste didn't go very far. Servants had to clean the pits manually, a task that makes royal service sound like a bad joke. Some castles even had multiple toilets stacked one above another, forming what historians now call garderobe towers. Imagine a 5-story funnel of filth descending into one unlucky collection pit. The smell must have been legendary. Still, the nobles were proud of these innovations. Having your own private seat, even one suspended over a sewer, was a mark of status. The peasants, on the other hand, had to make do with whatever was around: trees, fields, ditches, or, for the especially bold, the riverbank. Privacy was a luxury most couldn't afford. If you were lucky, you found a bush. If not, you simply turned your back to the wind and prayed. Archaeologists studying rural settlements have found traces of latrine pits outside huts, sometimes shared by entire families or neighborhoods. In short, medieval communal living went much further than we'd like to imagine, but not everything was misery. In villages, people found humor in the unavoidable. Folk songs and jokes about bodily functions were common, and local festivals often mocked the nobility's obsession with refinement. It was, in a strange way, an equalizer, because no matter how rich or poor you were, everyone had to face the same biological truth eventually. Of course, nobles did their best to pretend otherwise. Many castles employed attendants known as grooms of the stool, personal helpers whose entire job was to assist their masters during and after their private moments. These attendants were often surprisingly powerful. After all, they were the only ones who saw the king at his most human. Serving the monarch's most intimate needs earned enormous trust and occasionally influence in court. It was the strangest path to political power in history, loyalty through latrines. For the clergy, the situation was somewhere in between. Monks had shared latrines built over running water channels when possible, a clever design borrowed from Roman engineering. But when water wasn't available, they used pits like everyone else, and the smell became part of monastic life. Some monasteries burned incense constantly to mask the odor. Others simply embraced it as another test of faith. And while nobles had stone seats and servants, peasants developed remarkable adaptability. They used the outdoors not just out of necessity, but by habit. Farmers even turned waste into fertilizer, a cycle of life and death both efficient and disgusting. It was the original recycling, though probably not one you'd want to participate in. In winter, nature itself turned against everyone. The stone garderobes of the rich froze over, and the open-air spots of the poor became unbearable. Chronicles mention servants breaking ice just to use the facilities. It's safe to say that no one in the Middle Ages took comfort for granted. Yet through all these differences, between castle and cottage, stone and field, there was one unifying truth. When it came to hygiene, everyone suffered equally. Nobles may have sat on thrones, but in the end, every throne led to the same pit. For most of us, soap means civilization, the comforting smell of cleanliness, of modern life, of not being mistaken for a 14th century peasant. But in the Middle Ages, soap was a thing to be feared. Not because it didn't exist, it did, but because people believed that washing too much could actually kill you. The logic, at least by medieval standards, was flawless. Doctors taught that the human body was ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health was all about balance. Bathing in hot water, they warned, opened the pores and let in dangerous vapors known as miasmas, invisible clouds of disease that floated through the air like evil spirits. And if your pores were open when one of those passed by, well, that was basically an invitation for death. So while knights trained for battle and monks prayed for salvation, most people quietly decided to avoid water altogether. They wiped their faces with cloth, rubbed herbs on their skin, or sprinkled perfume to mask the smell. Cleanliness became a question of scent, not soap. If you smelled like lavender or rose oil, you were considered clean, even if your hands hadn't seen water since the last crusade. Bathhouses did exist in medieval Europe, especially in big cities like Paris, London, and Prague, but they were social centers, part spa, part tavern, part scandal waiting to happen. Men and women bathed together, drank wine, and sometimes forgot about the bathing part entirely. The church, of course, was not amused. By the 14th century, sermons thundered against these places of moral decay, accusing them of spreading sin and disease. Many bathhouses were shut down, not because they were unhealthy, but because they were too fun. The irony, of course, is that soap itself wasn't the problem. Medieval soap was made from animal fat and lye, harsh, smelly, and capable of cleaning anything, including the top layer of your skin. But it was expensive, and making it was a dirty business. Soap makers were banned from city centers because their boiling vats of grease produced a stench strong enough to drive saints to sin. So while the rich could afford imported soaps perfumed with jasmine or amber, most people relied on a bucket of water, a handful of ashes, and a prayer. Even when plagues began sweeping through Europe, Few connected disease to hygiene. When the Black Death struck in the 14th century, some believed it was punishment from God. Others blamed bad air, witches, or unlucky stars. Bathing, they thought, only made things worse by weakening the body's defenses. Monks and physicians advised people to keep their clothes on, close their windows and burn incense. Better to smell bad than to die clean, one chronicler joked, though it probably wasn't a joke at the time. Still, some tried to fight the filth in creative ways. Nobles stuffed flowers and spices into their sleeves to disguise odors. Perfumed gloves became fashionable. Barbers doubled as doctors, cutting hair and bleeding patients in the same session. A terrifying combination of hygiene and horror. The poor, meanwhile, kept doing what they'd always done, using rivers to wash, at least when the water wasn't frozen or full of waste. This strange fear of cleanliness shaped an entire era. The medieval world equated purity with the soul, not the skin. Dirt was a sign of humility, not neglect. Priests wore dust on their robes as proof of piety, and knights returning from war displayed grime like a badge of honor. It wasn't that they didn't care about health, they just didn't understand it. And so, for centuries, Europe lived in a perfume-soaked paradox, terrified of dirt, but more terrified of water. The Middle Ages managed to turn soap into a scandal, bathing into blasphemy, and cleanliness into controversy. But by the dawn of the Renaissance, that fear was beginning to fade. As science crept back into Europe, so did reason. And soon people would rediscover something that seemed almost revolutionary, that washing could actually be good for you. By the end of the Middle Ages, Europe was starting to smell a little different. Not better, just different. The world was changing. Trade routes were expanding, cities were growing, and people were finally beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, living ankle-deep in filth wasn't the best idea civilization ever had. The chamber pot became the great equalizer of the 15th century. Nobles, merchants, peasants, everyone had one. Usually made of ceramic, sometimes of metal, occasionally of wood, it was the medieval version of indoor plumbing. Portable, practical, and absolutely revolting. During the night, you'd keep it beside your bed. In the morning, a servant or family member would toss its contents out the window, preferably with a warning shout, though preferably didn't always happen. Streets were rivers of humanity's bad decisions. City officials tried to regulate it. Paris banned waste dumping in the streets as early as the 14th century. London passed laws requiring residents to keep privies, private pits, in their backyards. But enforcing these rules was impossible. You can't arrest everyone with bad aim and a bucket. So the tradition continued for centuries, a nightly symphony of splashes and curses echoing through Europe's narrow alleys. Still, some minds began to think ahead, literally. Renaissance engineers rediscovered Roman plumbing designs and started experimenting with new ways to dispose of waste. In castles and monasteries, stone pipes carried sewage down into rivers or moats. Primitive flushing systems appeared, not with water pressure but with buckets. In the late 1500s, Sir John Harrington, godson of Queen Elizabeth I, designed one of the first flushing toilets in England. The Queen reportedly tried it once, smiled politely, and went back to her chamber pot. But the real revolution wasn't mechanical, it was mental. The Renaissance changed how people saw the body. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo studied anatomy not as sin but as science. Cleanliness slowly stopped being a moral threat and became a mark of civility. Bathhouses reopened, no longer seen as dens of sin, but as symbols of refinement. Perfumed soaps from Italy and Spain became fashionable luxuries. Physicians began to recommend washing more often, cautiously of course, while merchants sold exotic powders and scented oils to those who could afford a touch of decency. Paper, once reserved for scribes and sacred texts, became more common thanks to the printing press. And somewhere along the line, someone made a discovery that would change bathroom history forever. Paper could have other uses. In China, people had been using it for hygiene since the 6th century, but in Europe, the idea took a while to catch on. The concept of using something clean, disposable, and soft instead of moss or wool was revolutionary, though not immediately affordable. For most Europeans, toilet paper remained a fantasy until centuries later. Meanwhile, sanitation slowly moved from superstition to science. Engineers dug sewers under cities. The wealthy experimented with indoor plumbing, and the concept of a flush, using water to carry waste away, spread through noble houses. The Renaissance may have given us art, astronomy, and philosophy, but its greatest unsung gift might just be the faint smell of progress. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the dream of a clean, private bathroom was finally real. Porcelain toilets, running water, and actual toilet paper became everyday luxuries. Humanity had at last conquered its oldest enemy, itself. After 1,000 years of wiping with whatever nature provided, civilization had arrived, right in the restroom. And yet, if you think about it, we're not so far from our ancestors. We still invent rules about what's proper, what's clean, what's shameful. We build invisible walls between the natural and the civilized. We may flush our waste away, but we never quite flush away the guilt. The Middle Ages may be gone, but their ghosts linger in our habits, our modesty, our obsession with purity. So next time you sit on your modern porcelain throne with running water, soft light, and a roll of paper at your side, take a moment to appreciate the absurd miracle of it all. Remember that once upon a time humanity fought dragons, built cathedrals, and wiped with hay. So here we are, 1,000 years, a few million chamber pots and countless bad smells later, finally sitting on our porcelain thrones, kings and queens of modern comfort. It took humanity centuries to conquer dragons, build cathedrals, and invent indoor plumbing, and somehow that last one might be the greatest victory of all. Because when you look back, the story of medieval hygiene isn't just about filth, it's about fear, faith, and the endless human effort to make sense of the body. People feared water, prayed over toilets, burned herbs to chase away demons, and turned simple survival into a moral lesson. They lived in a world where purity was measured not by soap, but by the soul, and where the line between sin and sanitation was thinner than a piece of parchment. And yet, through all the superstition, the ignorance, and the smells, there's something oddly beautiful about it. They tried. With herbs, with hay, with cold water and good intentions, they tried to live better, cleaner, holier lives. They failed spectacularly, but their failure paved the way for us to succeed. Today we live in a world where we can flush away our problems and wash our hands of history. But the next time you sit in silence, scrolling on your phone in the privacy of your modern throne room, remember this: the Middle Ages walked so you could wipe. Thanks for watching Medieval Crazy History, where truth is often stranger than legend.